Warhammer The Horus Heresy, Eidolon The Auric Hammer by Mark Collins. Chapter 8. The Victory to Come. The skies above Roshan had caught fire, in the hours just before the dawn. Roused from his barracks, Colonel Haslak had thought it was merely the rise of the sun, till he had checked the chrono. The false dawn stretched across the horizon, a great sweep of light and fury. Crimson and umber warred amidst the black of the night, the distant light of the stars. Some of the stars, he noticed, had begun to move, stars that had not been there the night previously. Many of his company had wept, not with fear but with relief. The Imperium, they had said over and over, the Imperium's come back for us. We are not forgotten. We are not forgotten. Colonel Haslak was swallowed deep at those words, and turned away so that his men could not see his face, or the sudden fear which dwelt there now. How can we be certain we have been found by the right side? He'd quit the walls shortly after that, intent on not giving the burning horizon the attention it so brazenly demanded. He had made his way down through the many flights of stairs, out into one of the vast courtyards of the Palace Militant. Time had changed the purpose of the citadel, but the name had lingered. He wondered if one day the iterators and bureaucrats would finally change it into something more becoming of the Imperium, as it would be. Soon, they promised, there would be an end to war. An end to the tithes of flesh and resources, when the galaxy was compliant and the Emperor's dominion was absolute. Then all the plenty of the cosmos would cascade down upon them. They would have new opportunities, at home and abroad, not merely to serve and fight and die, but to thrive. Years ago, the prop screeds had talked of the opportunities in the East, of Ultramar rising. Haslak knew in his soul that he would never see it. He would never leave this world as anything other than a soldier. There was a certain comfort in that. His family had served as Tatrikal and Wallsmen for generations without fail. Mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, all had done their part to ensure the continuity of their civilization. We endure so that all of Tatrikala might survive, his father had always said, a mantra engraved on the man's heart, carved into his very being by years of loyal service. Their masters had changed, true enough, but Haslak knew in his own heart that their determination remained as strong. It didn't matter that there were fewer bodies upon the walls when the Imperium had sworn to keep them safe, that their children were raised up to Imperial army regiments rather than given their place within the Civil Defense Corps. He did not know. Such questions remained forever beyond him, and the iterations were always present with their guidance. The Third Legion had left many examples of Imperial artists and philosophers with the Tatrikalans after the liberation, the better to bed down the ideas of Terran culture. In time, they assured, it would become galactic culture, human culture. All would be the Imperium, and all the petty divergences of strife would be set aside and rectified. The Emperor, beloved by all in his infinite mercy and wisdom, had already planned for it. He wanted desperately to trust in such pronouncements, that there was a plan guiding them in the infinite randomness of the universe. He heard the whispers in the shadows of the Lectitio Divinitatis and had ignored them. Haslak didn't need a god. There were no gods. Mortal might and will shaped the galaxy now. He idled in Liberation Square, distracted by the thoughts of the Imperium. If it was truly the Imperium returning, the tawdry name for the monument that had risen in the wake of the Great Crusade, a semicircle of marble columns reared up from a central platform of black volcanic stone. Arrayed around the base of each column were beautifully rendered golden statues, each one depicting a warrior of the legion that had illuminated Tatrikala. Haslak had passed this way many times during his life, making the square into a central cog of the machinery of his days. He drew nearer, gazing up at the renditions of the Astartes and their master. Below the central column were two figures, their gold filigreed with platinum and inlaid with precious jewels. The larger figure was truly immense, a looming presence that dominated even the great open space of the square. Its power and majesty dwarfed even the mighty rendering of an Astartes that knelt before him, marked with rank carvings intended for some greatness. It evinced strong and strange emotions in him. He took in every detail, as he always did. The statues were beautiful in such a way that he always found new facets to admire, things he had never noticed before, like a secret slowly being unraveled before his eyes. Noble, inspirational figures, protection from the Xenos threats and rebellious elements that lurked beyond the sky. Then the storms had come, and the silence. No ships, and no astropathic messages. Only the dark and the cold, closing in around them, smothering them in its unending bleakness. The thought had haunted them, that they might die alone and unmourned. Many had gone mad and taken their own lives rather than force the slow starvation that might come without imperial plenty. An empire half built and a culture half demolished, striving for simple survival. Haslak suppressed a shiver. He tried to focus on the sculptures again, the curve of their features, the immensity of them, at once comprehensible and yet vaster than worlds, too mighty for the confines of Tatrikala. He measured himself against their grandeur. He was no longer a young man, and clinging to a post that the years had diminished. There was grey creeping in at his temples, and his aim was no longer what it used to be. Yet he still had his mind, kept sharp by duty, and relentlessly honed under the state of emergency they had endured these last years. The storms had passed, yet the fear lingered. It clung to everything, smothering the world like the gilding of the square. Now there was fire on the horizon, and the twin serpents of hope and doubt were once again writhing in his belly. The first sirens made his head snap around, the statues forgotten as he staggered in near physical shock. The clatter of anti-aircraft weaponry realigning rang through the square. His eyes rose to the walls, to the men already moving in their own sudden bursts of momentum. He started to move, stumbling over his own feet. The shells began to stain the air. Fire and flak hurled itself into the darkness, seeking the targets that never appeared. He could hear confused shouts for clarification, for orders. His vox clicked from channel to channel before it chirped with a priority override. One of his opposite numbers from a city. He listened again to the ident code. It was from Sartros, down in the equatorial zones. He keyed into the channel. Only screams greeted him. The vox capture mechanisms had been set on a wide band, taking in every moment of human agony as it was splayed across the city's skin. He could hear the population dying, a culture being wiped out. Wet, tearing sounds echoed into his ear, undercut again by undiluted, unfiltered pain.
Children of the Emperor.
A voice rumbled over the box, booming with laughter.
Death to his foes.
The sharp reports of bolt fire drowned out the noise before the crunch of a descending boot finally silenced the transmission. As though rushing in to fill the silence, the air around him was suddenly screaming. Haslak staggered back, eyes up, watching as the first ships tore overhead. The walls were burning as munitions rained. He saw men that he knew, that he had served with for years, reduced to nothing more than silhouettes against the firestorm. The flames caught on the edges of the howling ships, illuminating the corroded metal, the strangely warped hulls with their eye-searing colours, and the lurid murals that still glistened wetly there, as though freshly painted. A great talon and the sweep of a wing. Second wave swung in low again. Explosions rocked the great slab-sided buildings behind Haslak as he turned. His hand was on his sidearm as he screamed orders into the vox that would never reach his men. Form up, eyes on the enemy, weapons ready, form up, men! The roar of the great ships was everywhere around him now, consuming the world in its cacophony. He turned to run when an almighty crash rang out behind him. Shrapnel and debris struck his back. Blood blossomed along one cheek, and he winced back. He hit something solid and turned slowly. The figure that had struck the earth towered over him. As massive as one of the statues, a twisted mockery, its nobility distorted. Pale hair hung lankly to one side of its head, its flesh pulsing and writhing with some internal motion. Its armor was a molten ruin of pink and gold, broken only where other riotous colors had been smeared, or had emerged from the metalwork of their own volition. It clung to an immense hammer, its head wreathed in killing lightning. The monster's mouth twisted into a semblance of a smile, and it raised the weapon.
Death to his foes.
It repeated, and brought the hammer down. Eidolon looked down at the slurry he had reduced the soldier to, poking at the human Detrius with one boot before turning away. The galaxy teemed with prey. With precious little toys the gods had prepared for them, they broke so easily, from Istvan to Terra. Humanity was an eternally frail disappointment. Eidolon despaired that he had ever been so weak and fragile. If he had not ascended, would he have lived the same short and stunted life, content to die for his family's honour, rather than be offered up as a sacrifice to the Emperor?
Unity made me what I am, but it could just as easily have broken me.
He turned away from the shattered corpse, and looked up at the centerpiece of the city's veneration. One of the columns had already been struck by missile fire, crumbling away, half of it jutting from the pavilion like a shattered spur of bone. He stalked forward, turning the hammer's weight over and over in his hand. The statue of Fulgrim looked down at him, seeing him with the same dulled metal eyes and simpering praise as it spared for Eidolon's simulacrum. He stepped towards it, reaching out one-clawed hands to drag his fingers along the lines of the sculpture. He remembered when it had been raised. The finest artisans of the fleet had toiled for weeks to craft something worthy of the Phoenician's image. I wanted to commemorate the occasion. Eidolon's gene-father whispered from out of memory. The generations to come must see the faces of those who liberated them. We raised them up, my son. We gave them unity. His hands clenched around the haft of Gloria Eterna, and he raised it in one sharp motion. He snarled as he brought it back down. Metal splintered and buckled. His own once perfect face shattered under the blow. Features deformed and ran as the fielded hammer struck it. Metal melted and pulled as he destroyed the shadow of his former self. Eidolon growled and then paused, leaning his hammer into the molten wreckage and steaming shards, the air wafting with atomized metal. He turned and looked at Fulgrim, his gauntlets still locked around the hammer's haft.
It would be so easy to destroy your legacy as well. Perhaps mine will suffice for now.
Eidolon turned away from his father's idol in disgust and surveyed the burning city. He had dropped into the heart of it, to honor the reconsecration of the square and smear its ashes upon the heart of his old pride. Around him, other elements of the third millennial were deploying. Malakris's men whooped with savage joy as they lunged from their gunships or burst from the barbed cocoons of the Charybdis and Dreadclaw assault craft. One of the Dreadclaws impacted hard against the central spire, claws scrabbling for purchase, and its melter cutters and drills began to incise their way into the city's flesh. They were murdering a culture, bit by bit, action by action. They were forcing a civilization's face into its own rancid blood. They were killing the future. The human race's fate was a single, drawn-out scream, milked from lungs already choked with their own deaths. They were still illuminators. They still brought the light and promise of what was to come. Just as the Eldari had realized what they were bringing into being, Eidolon let himself laugh. That had been their end. The death of all they had been. Humanity might well follow them to that grave. Perhaps he was ensuring its end. Even now, digging the charnel pits for worlds he would never know. People he would have no kinship with. When terror was theirs, when terror is ours, then what? He paused. There was nothing here that could truly hurt him. Not yet. He could hear the roar of sonic weapons upon the walls as the cacophony unleashed themselves. He fancied he could even hear the clatter of blades as the Vociferons' ace seats sated their martial pleasures. Duels would be ringing out across the burning city. A fine dirge to wing the mortal chattel to their deaths or their enslavement. Perhaps, if he listened, then he would hear the Chthonians as their own attack vectors swept in. The whoops and jeers of ganger savagery elevated to the transhuman. There was an ember of nobility somewhere in Eidolon's heart that still recoiled at their very existence. Then this world burned, and all that had been taken to slake the appetites and needs of the third. Then he could dwell on such things. Eidolon knew in his heart that they would have their place above all the others, even if it took them 10,000 years to attain it.
Perhaps I will deal with you later, father,
he said to the statue, before he turned and began to idle towards the waiting command center.
I have other matters to attend to. I have a world to murder.
I really liked that. I don't think I've ever noticed the, I don't think I ever really realized what a space marine assault was like from the point of view of just regular humans. And honestly, the way Mark writes this, it's absolutely terrifying. It really puts you in... It really puts you in the head of that poor random soldier that Eidolon smashes into a smear on the ground. I think that was really artfully written. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie. I kind of thought I felt really bad for him. I thought that he was gonna be something more than he was. I didn't realize that he was going to be such a short-lived character. It really, felt like such a... most of the chapter was this random guy. It was such, an investment. And then the minute he goes, it's just oh! Oh, my little heart. I can't believe you've done this, you bastard. Anyway, I loved that. I loved that. I really like that. Also, why do they keep saying for 10,000? It's such a nod to Warhammer 40,000. I kind of love it, but at the same time, it's a little bit cringe, don't you think? Even if it takes 10,000 years, that's such a specific number that feels very unnatural for people to speculate or swear to. Surely, if they wanted to go for a big number, it would be 1 million or something like that. That's my thoughts anyway. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm really liking this book. We are actually, that chapter brings us to more than halfway through. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's like 18 chapters, so we are technically halfway through. But in terms of like pages in the book, I think we're over the halfway mark. And so we should be able to get most of this out in the next week or so, I imagine. So it won't be long. It won't be that long until we reach the end. I feel like I've improved at getting these out in a more timely manner. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I hope that you're, getting them at a pace that you're happy with more than anything. Anyway, thank you so much for choosing to take the time to listen to this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do leave a like, do share, follow, all that stuff, all the good stuff. Do subscribe. A lot of the people listening to this aren't subscribed, and it really helps the channel out. It really, really helps the channel out. So please do that. I'm going to do my best to keep getting more 40k books unofficial audio to you. Just because I know that not everyone can actually get the books, and I especially really like getting the limited edition. Like, I feel very lucky to have gotten the limited edition signed version of this book, even though it wasn't sold out when it was officially released. It's just very pretty. Like, every time I pick it up to read it, I'm just like, yes. Like, it might not be quite as fancy as the Lions book, but there's something just delightful about the simplicity. The book's silver edges, the artwork, and the little metallic inlays on it, and the lovely violet, like, cloth backing around the edge and the spine and the back cover. And a little silk ribbon for the bookmarker. Like, it's just lovely to pick up, and it makes me happy every time I get to read it. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Mwah.